Due to the graphic nature of this urban legend, listener discretion is advised. This episode includes depictions of harm against minors and graphic violence. We advise extreme caution for children under 13. Some people really shouldn't be allowed to work with children. If the camp had done a better job of vetting their counselors, you would be sleeping. Instead, you had to spend the night going from cabin to promise a group of 12-year-olds that there isn't a strange poison ivy-themed maniac looking to murder them in their beds. You're annoyed, frankly. The whole thing is just illogical. Why hide in poison ivy? Some kind of if the knife doesn't get you, the rash will thing? Ridiculous. But then, you hear a rustling behind you. You refuse to believe your eyes. You refuse. You keep telling yourself it's not real, even as a blood-drenched man rises from beneath the dark leaves, even as his knife punctures your torso, even as he pulls you into the woods, dragging your broken body until it disappears beneath the sea of ivy in the clearing below. For this is his hunting ground, and you just wandered into it. Welcome to Haunted Places, a Parcast original. I'm Greg Polson. Today's episode is part of our Urban Legends series. Every Tuesday, we explore those chilling stories you hear secondhand, the kind that seem made up, but contain a kernel of truth. Urban Legends is only on Spotify, so keep listening here to never miss an episode. But don't forget to come back each Thursday for a classic episode of Haunted Places, covering yet another ghost-filled locale. You can find episodes of Haunted Places and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. To stream Haunted Places for free on Spotify, just open the app and type Haunted Places in the search bar. Campfire stories are a tradition at summer camps around the United States, and many counselors use the opportunity to test their campers' courage and gullibility. But it is the story's shaky hold on truth that makes them so effective. They're just believable enough that the teller could have been there, and it's horrifying to wonder what they had to do to survive. Coming up, we're going back to camp, where we'll learn there are much worse threats than poison ivy. There are several types of summer camp legends, but they all tend to boil down to one thing. Someone wants to slaughter the defenseless campers, horribly, graphically. A vicious revenge tale the jittery little kids didn't realize they'd walked into the moment they passed through the camp's gates. How the killer got there is determined by local anxieties. Maybe the killer was injured in a horrible accident and left for dead. Maybe they were bullied and hazed, nearly killed in a horrible prank gone wrong. Maybe they're just like you, sitting beside you, waiting for you to go to sleep. Maybe they'll kill the first person who admits they're scared. The campfire was a sacred tradition. Julie's parents had told her that the best part of her summer would be sitting on a carved-out log next to friends while they all cooked their s'mores over crackling flames. They neglected to mention the stray embers that flicked onto your clothes. Or the smoke. The smoke was the worst. Julie wanted to enjoy herself, but her eyes were watering. It made it hard for her to see, let alone cook her marshmallow. Her lungs felt strangely sticky and heavy. It wasn't the picturesque summer camp experience she'd been promised. She had made 2 friends, which was 2 more than she'd ever made at a job, summer or otherwise. Aaron and Micah sat on either side of her, knocking against her shoulder every now and then to reassure her that she was part of the group. Micah offered to roast Julie's marshmallow for her. She blushed and nodded gratefully, afraid that speaking would result in an uncontrollable coughing fit. A moment later, Micah swung the stick over to Julie so she could blow out the last few flames that bubbled on the sugary surface. She did so happily, then smushed the marshmallow between graham crackers. The sugar rush made her feel almost invincible, which was good, because it was about to be story time. Erin volunteered to go first. She claimed that she'd heard something in the nurse's office that just had to be shared. Erin always told the best stories. She was glamorous and sophisticated, with her intricately braided hair and perfect makeup, even when she led the junior campers through their swimming drills. Best of all, Erin was beautifully, hilariously mean. Julie had never had a popular friend before, and it felt so special that someone like Erin was sharing her jokes rather than aiming them at her. A burst of smoke swept over Julie's face. She tried to pass off her cough as a super cool yawn. She turned away from the fire, resting her chin on her hand, which meant she only saw a flash of Erin's devilish grin as her friend began to speak. Nearly 20 years ago, the camp had been going through some hard times. They couldn't get enough kids to come. It was the internet's fault or something, maybe Y2K. 20 years was basically a lifetime ago. Julie nodded her head. She was only 4 years away from turning 20, but it felt like an eternity. The camp director at the time, Mr. Lazarus, had to make some tough decisions to keep the camp afloat. He shut some of the bunks down and shortened the length of the season. Many of the counselors were upset about the reduced pay. They hired a lot of college kids, and those kids depended on the money they made at the camp for the rest of the year. The most vocal opponents of the changes were two students named Rick and Melinda. Julie mouthed the names to herself. She pictured Rick as a boy with a farmer's tan, who always wore a faded baseball hat. He had rips in his jeans and wore a collection of very cool vintage t-shirts. Melinda would have been more polished. She had a selection of floral dresses and cute little diamond studs in her ears. Her hair and makeup were always perfect, even in the heat of summer, just like Erin. Erin's eyeliner made the small lights dancing in her pupils look even brighter as she continued her story. Rick and Melinda tried to do things the nice way at first. They attempted to negotiate with Mr. Lazarus by phone and even email. They made a petition that all of the other counselors signed, but Mr. Lazarus didn't seem to care. Julie looked back to Erin, braving the onslaught of smoke. She wanted to catch the expressions of her fellow counselors when things took a turn for the funny. But what Erin said next wasn't funny at all. When none of their pleading worked, Rick and Melinda got serious. They told Mr. Lazarus they'd like to show up to camp a few days early and help him with setting things up in order to earn some extra cash. He agreed. The three of them worked together throughout the first day. Mr. Lazarus commended them for being such good workers and good sports. Then, in the dead of night, Rick and Melinda snuck into Mr. Lazarus's private cabin. Rick bound Mr. Lazarus's feet and wrists to the bed. Melinda pulled out a hacksaw she borrowed from the wood shop. She had Rick tie smaller straps around Mr. Lazarus's arm, near his shoulder and on his thigh. Melinda placed the blade next to these straps and began to saw. One leg came off, then the other. Mr. Lazarus screamed for them to stop. He would do anything they wanted. Rick laughed and told Mr. Lazarus that he had his chance. The camp was now theirs. This was just a little fun before the kids got there. Melinda sawed off Mr. Lazarus's arms. They stacked all the appendages in a neat little pile next to the bed, like a bundle of freshly cut firewood. Mr. Lazarus passed out somewhere in the grisly process. As a last little bit of fun, they untied the tourniquets and let the blood spray across the walls before tying them on again. Maybe he survived for now. Maybe he didn't. At least he'd learned his lesson. The fire popped, and Julie nearly jumped out of her skin. This wasn't funny at all, but Erin was smiling like it was. Clearly, some part of this was fun for her. Julie looked around the rest of the circle. The campers were entranced by Erin now, leaning forward on their logs, wide-eyed and ready for more. Julie gulped. The light of the fire gave Erin a glow, like some strange dark angel. She let the group settle. Then she continued. Melinda and Rick opened up the camp as scheduled. Betty was another student who relied on the money from her summer job. Melinda and Rick told her that Mr. Lazarus had found a bit of extra money. Even though the camp wasn't opening for its full term, they would be getting paid like it was. She should have been happy, but she didn't like the knowing smiles that Rick and Melinda kept shooting towards each other. Plus, Mr. Lazarus was gone. Melinda and Rick claimed that he decided to take a little break for the first week of camp, but he'd be back. Betty went along with it. She didn't have any real reason to suspect the two, just a hunch. At least until the cabin closest to hers started to smell. The smell was impossible to ignore, and Rick's eyes kept darting from cabin to cabin, as if he expected to be watched. When she mentioned checking in with Mr. Lazarus, he deflected with excuses, never giving a straight answer. She would never forgive herself if she didn't investigate. She figured the best clues would be in her boss's locked cabin. While the rest of the group was at a campfire sing-along, Betty borrowed a knife from the kitchen and tried to cut into the door. But it was too thick. She refused to give up, telling herself that the off-tune singing of the campers would cover the sound of glass breaking as she shattered a window. She called into the darkness, but received no response. What she did get was a whiff of foul air coming from inside the cabin, pungent and sour. It spilled through the small square, straight into her nose. She had to hold back the urge to be sick. Betty climbed in the window and stood up slowly in the half-darkness. She clapped her hands over her mouth to stifle her scream as moonlight revealed Mr. Lazarus's writhing torso. Necrotic tissue clung to the stumps where his limbs had been. They had left him in his own blood and filth for days, barely alive. Betty was about to rush to his side when she heard a voice behind her. Melinda asked her what she was doing. Julie's legs were shaking. She wanted the story to be over. She wanted to lock herself in the cabin and stay there until her parents came to pick her up. Erin gave her a strangely gentle look, perhaps a shade of mercy. But she still continued on with the story. Melinda tried to get the knife away from Betty, but Betty was quicker. She stabbed Melinda and ran for the front office and the camp's only telephone. When the police showed up, a sobbing Rick confessed to the crime, while he cradled a barely breathing Melinda. Mr. Lazarus perished, only minutes from salvation. Julie clapped. She was relieved the whole thing had ended. They'd never have to think about it again. But Erin wasn't done. She glared at her friend for a moment before turning back to the rest of her captive audience. The best part of the story was that Betty now worked as the nurse at the camp, and Rick and Melinda were just released from jail. Coming up, truth and fiction begin to blur. Now back to the story. Julie was going to kill Erin. How was she supposed to sleep, knowing that there were two killers on the loose? Worse, dismembering killers. This wasn't the fun, silly campfire story she'd expected. Julie oscillated between frustration and fear. She was supposed to take her first steps of freedom here, not be worried about losing her life. Of course, the two girls shared a cabin. Julie turned over in her bed, sighing loudly. Erin told her to stop being so dramatic. Julie sat straight up. She was not being dramatic. The story was ridiculous. Erin rolled her eyes. She admitted that some of her story was embellished, but most of it was true. Julie felt her shoulders sag slightly. Maybe the only part that was true was that Betty had worked here when she was younger. The rest could be lies. That would be fine. She'd even compliment Erin on her storytelling. Erin told her not to get her hopes up. Mr. Lazarus was killed by Melinda and Rick. Betty was a final girl in her own right. and now held a job as a nurse at this very camp. This wasn't nearly as much embellishing as Julie had been hoping for. Still, Julie needed just one vital point of clarification in order to get to sleep. If Melinda and Rick weren't running free, she would be fine. But Erin didn't know where Melinda and Rick were. She'd overheard Betty talking about them in the nursing office, but she didn't get any real specifics on what happened to them. For all she knew, they could be hiding in the trees of the camp every summer. Julie's stomach flipped. Her heart pounded in her ears. They weren't safe here. God, if only her parents had known, they never would have let her go. Erin told her to calm down. Julie took a deep breath and tried to go to her happy place. Something scratched outside of the cabin. Usually Julie could tell herself that it was just a tree branch. But what if it wasn't? They could have all been lured into a false sense of security while Melinda and Rick plotted their revenge. Maybe they didn't care who they killed this time. Erin grabbed Julie by the shoulders. She told Julie to breathe. Julie hadn't realized that she'd been holding her breath. She'd been so absorbed in her own thoughts. She exhaled slowly, her breath stuttering as it left her. Erin apologized for adding all the details. She just thought it would be a fun campfire story. Julie didn't feel comforted, but she didn't want Erin to feel too bad. She told her it was okay. They should try to sleep. She laid back down, but her eyes stayed wide open. She knew that if she closed them, she'd have visions of murderers and severed limbs dancing in her head. In the morning, she'd speak to Nurse Betty and learn the truth. From there, she could call her parents and leave. She repeated the plan in her head over and over until her nerves started to settle. Julie woke up. She didn't remember falling asleep. The sun streaming through the windows was far too bright. She wanted to roll back over and shut the rest of the world out. The night before came back to her slowly. She dragged herself out of bed and got dressed. Kids screamed outside. She had just mustered the energy to tell them to shut up when the sound suddenly stopped. She stepped into the sunlight and slipped her shades on. Maybe the kids got bored. Julie didn't like seeing the space so empty, but it was breakfast time. She half jogged to the nursing cabin, ready to get everything over with and call her parents. She couldn't live with this kind of stress. Julie stepped inside without knocking. The intake room was empty. A muffled sound came from behind the closed door to the examination room. Julie stepped over to it, unsure. Someone screamed from within. She tried the handle, but it was locked. Julie rammed her body against the door. It bounced, but it didn't open. This looked easier in movies. The screams continued behind the door. Julie shoved a keycard into the side of the door and felt the weight give just slightly. It was all she needed. She turned the handle and shoved with all her might. It opened. She wasn't prepared for what was on the other side. The nurse's wrists had been tied to the hospital bed with zip ties, but the rest of her was on the small plywood floor. Blood spilled from large gashes across Betty's legs. She didn't stop screaming. But where were her attackers? Where were Rick and Melinda? Julie stepped forward to find a knife at her throat. The lock behind her clicked shut. A voice told her to stand perfectly still. But it wasn't some sinister 40-something. It was Erin. Her first friend at camp had carved into the nurse's legs like it was some bizarre art project. She couldn't believe it. Julie wanted to turn her head and have her eyes confirm what her ears already knew. But she couldn't risk getting cut. The nurse needed her. Julie asked why Erin was doing this. She felt the blade dig into her throat slightly. A small dribble of blood trailed down her neck. She could practically hear the eye roll as Erin mocked her for not putting it together immediately. A picture was starting to become clear in Julie's mind. She was pretty sure she knew what had happened, but she asked Aaron to spell it out for her so she had time to think. The knife wavered slightly as Aaron told her that she was Rick and Melinda's child. Julie kept her voice steady as she pointed out that she had done nothing that justified her being included in the revenge. Aaron paused at that, thinking. Julie took a deep breath and ducked. She felt the knife score her cheek, but she was free of Aaron for a moment. She turned to face her attacker. Aaron raced at her, weapon first. She tried to swipe at Julie's face, but then she fell backward, slipping in the pool of blood on the floor. Julie went for the keys on Nurse Betty's waist. Aaron rose, now smeared in blood. Her stained fingers pulled the knife from the wet floor. Julie tried to tell Aaron that she didn't have to do this, but she could barely get the words out. Aaron laughed. She didn't care about what she did or didn't have to do. She only told the story to cover her tracks. Her parents weren't ex-cons. They were bankers and would never be caught dead in a dumpy camp like this. Saying she was related to Melinda and Rick was a good story, but now that she'd seen Julie's reaction, there was no need to lie to her. This was for Aaron and no one else. The beginning of a glorious career in killing. Aaron lunged for Julie. Julie barely managed to drop and dash under the bed in time. The knife flashed back and forth in front of her. Tears were stinging her eyes now. The metal of the key was warm in Julie's hands. She held it tight, letting it dig into her skin. Aaron laughed again. She was the one with the power. She could do whatever she wanted. Julie made herself as flat as she could. She only had one shot to save herself and Nurse Betty. She pushed the keyblade between her knuckles. When Aaron swiped to the left, Julie rushed out of the bed to the right and threw her fist toward Aaron's face. She felt the wet membrane resist for a moment before the key embedded itself in Aaron's eye. Aaron shrieked in surprise and pain. The knife fell to the ground, but Aaron was still reaching out to stop her. Julie pulled the key out of Aaron's left eye and jammed it into her right. The girl was screaming continually now. Her hands clawed at her eyes. Julie didn't try and pull the key out this time. She grabbed the knife and cut through the zip ties before dragging Betty outside. She left Aaron writhing on the floor and locked the cabin tight. But when she returned with the authorities, Aaron was gone. A new legend developed in the following years. It told of a woman with no eyes prowling the camp for revenge. She kills whoever she finds, for she couldn't recognize her actual enemy if she tried. In 2015, film director Eli Roth told Mashable his own summer camp killer story. He was a camp counselor in Weston, Massachusetts, when his group of 10 and 11-year-olds became convinced by an urban legend about a forgotten camper called the H-Man. The story went that the maniac was planning to rip the kids' chest cavities open in order to get his revenge after being left for dead. The tale didn't begin with Roth, but his telling helped it spread like wildfire. By the night of the camp's first sleepover, the preteens were making very sharp makeshift weapons and planning seances in hopes of resurrecting and trapping the H-Man before he could hurt them. The night of the sleepover itself was pandemonium. Children screamed that they'd seen the H-Man in the woods. Parents were called. The next year, the story developed an even stronger hold on the campers, as the self-identified survivors of the previous year passed it on. Roth's tale illustrates the primary elements of a summer camp killer's story: the origin of the villain, a previous confrontation indicating the threat he poses, and a warning to avoid him at all costs, though he is never entirely avoidable. This third characteristic is what gives such stories legs. You may think you're safe, but you're really not. You are standing in his hunting ground. If these beats sound familiar to other legends we've covered, that's because they are. The Hook and the Babysitter in Peril urban legends work with the same sort of maniac character and structure, all passed on by a friend of a friend who witnessed it, of course. This pattern is given a greater veracity at a summer camp, because both campers and counselors tend to return in cycles. If someone challenges the story, the counselor can say it was before the skeptic's time, and someone with a longer work history will generally back it up. The closest these stories get to truth tends to be stories like Roth's, where panic creates a shared terror in the camp's recent past. Summer camp killer legends are defined by their localization. The details are distinct, graphically violent, and limited to the environment where they came from. Geographical markers like lakes, rocks, clearings, and, most importantly, campers' cabins are the stage for all of the action. Unlike the town's Lover's Lane, they are impossible to avoid. The state of constant threat tends to benefit the storyteller, who is almost always an authority figure. If their goal is intimidation and forced respect, then a good campfire killer story is the best way to achieve it. Thanks again for tuning into Haunted Places. We'll be back on Tuesday with a new urban legend, and on Thursday with a new haunted place. You can find more episodes of Haunted Places and all other Parcast originals for free on Spotify. Not only does Spotify already have all your favorite music, but now Spotify's making it easy for you to enjoy all of your favorite Parcast originals, like Haunted Places, for free, from your phone, desktop, or smart speaker. To stream Haunted Places on Spotify, just open the app and type Haunted Places in the search bar. Until next time, don't believe some of the things you hear. Believe all of them. Haunted Places was created by Max Cutler and is a Parcast Studios original. Executive producers include Max and Ron Cutler. Sound design by Carrie Murphy, with production assistance by Ron Shapiro, Carly Madden, and Aaron Larson. This episode of Haunted Places was written by Lil D. Ritter and Jennifer Richey, with writing assistance by Greg Castro. I'm Greg Polson.